Welcome to another exciting episode of the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. I'm Tom Schwab, the founder of Interview Valet, and today I'm your host as we dive into an exciting topic that's shaking up the world of business and marketing. It's how to harness the power of generative AI, specifically ChatGPT, to supercharge your referral network and grow your business. You see, in this post-AI world, the way people find out about us, the way they hear about us, it's changing rapidly. We're no longer just talking about SEO. We're talking about LMO. That's language model optimization. Today, I'm joined by two brilliant minds, Sam Mallikarjunan and Andrei Oprisan. These guys are pioneers in the AI space and have been behind some of the best products you've enjoyed from HubSpot. They're here to share their actionable insights on how you can leverage AI, not just as a tool, but as a powerful ally in your business strategy. If you're a coach, a consultant, professional services marketer, or a nonfiction author looking to stay ahead of the curve, this episode is going to be a game changer for you. Let's jump in and explore how you can turn AI into your best referral source. The world is changing. In this post-generative AI world, people aren't just looking at search engines anymore. They are asking the large language models for recommendations. And that impacts how we do podcast interviews. Today, we've got two amazing, brilliant people that are going to help us talk about what LMO is, how you can use ChatGPT to be your best referral source. We've got Sam Mallikarjunan and Andrei Oprisan.
Thanks for having us, Tom.
Yeah. So,
Thanks, Tom.
Sam, can you start here? Can you sort of explain who you are, your background, and why people need to listen to this?
Yeah, so I'm Sam. I was one of the first 150 or so employees at HubSpot, which is how we met, Tom. I was the head of growth at HubSpot Labs, which is how I met Andrei, where we worked for Dharmesh. After HubSpot, Andrei and I co-founded a company called OneScreen.ai, which is the first ever performance marketing platform for offline marketing. And then after we exited last year, he and I started working together with Dharmesh, the co-founder of HubSpot, on Agent.ai.
And Agents.ai, definitely want to check that out, and we're going to dive deep into this here. Andrei, how about yourself? Give us a little background.
So thank you, Tom. So I'm a tech guy through and through. I like to build product. I started off as an engineer. I was early days at Wayfair back in the day. Before they were called Wayfair, they were called CSN stores. I've worked at companies like HubSpot, where I met Sam, where I ran HubSpot Labs, the R&D part of it, the engineering side, as well as larger companies like Liberty Mutual and Wayfair one more time, to really drive digital transformation at scale and optimize very large products for millions of users, companies with billions of dollars of revenue. And I'm also a machine learning guy. My background is in machine learning. Before it was cool, before we had all these amazing chat interfaces, ChatGPT obviously made things a lot easier over the last year and a half since it's been out. Can't believe it's only been a year and a half. Feels like much longer. But here we are. We're trying to figure out how to make these technologies safer, more useful for people. And that's what I'm really passionate about. How do we bring those complex technical capabilities to more people? What does that look like? What does the world look like in a world where ChatGPT can be more than just a chatbot and an actual helper, an actual team member? Think of these hybrid work environments, in office, remote, out in the world. What if you never meet that person and they're just an avatar who just, communicates, talks? Now we could even generate audio and video pretty darn well, and also complete increasingly complex tasks. What does that mean for the nature of work for companies? And that's what Agent.ai is all about. What is that professional network as the world keeps evolving? We're bringing AI to the center of it. It's right in the name. And these agents are just self-sufficient again, the equivalent of not people, but just technology that can execute tasks sequentially or fairly ambiguous as well. What does that look like? And we're both super passionate about that, and we're glad to work again with Dharmesh and some of the HubSpot folks to bring that to life.
Oh, he's the smart one. I'm the one with the zippy one-liners. It's easy to make something powerful. It's hard to make something powerful easy to use.
And HubSpot and Dharmesh especially has always been at the front edge of things. The other day, I started to play around with the grading tool they have, the AI grader there, and it really brought attention in my mind of that AI is listening, it's looking, and it's finding, because talk about making things simple. All I know is that I think most of the time I'm using ChatGPT like playing solitaire on a computer, right? It's so powerful, but asking it now for recommendations. And that's something that we've seen here over the summer of 2024. We'll ask people, well, how'd you find out about Interview Valet? And they're like, well, I asked ChatGPT and you guys came up. Or clients now are saying, yes, I'm getting traffic from that. So Sam, can you sort of explain that? Well, we used to talk about SEO, and you're explaining to me that it's LMO now.
Language model optimization instead of search engine optimization. I mean, the thing is, human nature is more oriented around conversation, right? Conversation is natural to us. Queries and databases aren't, right? You have to train your mind to think in terms of like Boolean logic of like what keywords you want and everything else like that. So it's natural. There's been this trend. It's why chatbots on websites had such a high impact on conversion rates. It's why people still like talking to human sales reps. You want to have a conversation so you don't have to put as much thought into what your like how you're doing it, right? I know what you meant. I'm not going to worry about what you actually said. And a couple of important things. One is the context of who you are. So things like ChatGPT are starting to establish a memory. So if you ask about an Interview Valet, like it's going to understand that has the context of podcasts. And then the other thing about a conversation is it has turns in the conversation. Like as we progress, unlike a query, right, which is like a set point in time. And then if you do another Google search, it's not really the results aren't really going to be related to the one you just did before. In a conversation, it's expected to kind of build on it. So that's why we've seen things like ChatGPT have such broad adoption. Is it's a natural human behavior, and now the challenge for brands is SEO is actually pretty straightforward and easy, right? It's like inbound links, domain authority, content relevancy, content freshness, right? We had cute names like the Panda update, the Penguin update. Language model optimization is dramatically more complex because it's more similar to how we think about brand perception, right? So if you think about how the nation views your brand, you now have to take that same kind of mental approach and less of a technical approach towards how AI sees your brand, because that AI is just a reflection of kind of the content it's trained on, which is a reflection of people's opinions.
Using that example, I can remember the Panda update, the Penguin update, and most of them were to improve the search engines, but also to punish the black hat, right? The keyword stuffing, the link farms, all the rest of that. Do you think that LMO will be able to be hacked, if you will? What's your sense on that, Andrei?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, there's already research in this space. The safety of AI and these language large models is hotly debated and a big focus area in academic research and machine learning. There is something called adversarial search engine optimization for large language models. Essentially, you can think of the equivalent would be, you're building a website yourself, and you can craft the content in a way that can poison the LLM as it relates to competitors. So being able to discredit them, being able to attack their products in a very similar way, right? You could create a fake website, publish fake reviews, publish all sorts of content as it relates to some of those brands. So there's something very similar that you can do with these LLMs, but it has more to do with how the LLMs internalize that content. So on the outside, it might look like this is a completely benign website, But in reality, because the LLM doesn't actually read every single word, it does something called translating that text to tokens. And so a token is roughly a word or 0.75 words, and it has a big database of these things called tokens, and it just translates. That's its own machine language to understand human language. So there are ways to essentially have fairly innocuous looking text, maybe 1 in 10 words looks off. But the actual meaning to a machine, to a language model is the complete opposite. So it's actually, even though it might read like a good review, it may have 2 or 3 keywords that turns the entire sentiment of that text negative, and in a way that has a much bigger negative impact in terms of the recall of, let's say, your brand or your products. And again, there's different ways to actually protect against this. There's different ways of built into the language models to identify some of those patterns. These are just emergent capabilities of language models, and we're still defining that tool set. Again, AI safety is a huge topic of research and focus area. And there are absolutely ways, and companies are taking advantage of this. There are case studies, there's this research out in the wild, and thankfully there's even better tooling out there now that can actually prevent adversaries from taking advantage of language models. But it's early, and some of those first players that are, have that mover advantage, that data gets internalized in these neural networks and pathways of the language models, and it's actually fairly hard to remove some of that internalized data. Similar to how a human being learns over time, you're building upon your past knowledge, you're learning how to ride a bike, you get better at it, you're getting more adventurous. Same thing with LLMs, you're building layers of knowledge, and it's using some of those lower levels of knowledge for future reference. Imagine if someone were able to poison and teach you the wrong way to ride a bike. It might take a very long time for you to unlearn that pattern. You have to do essentially brain surgery within the LLMs to kind of dissect some of that information. And it gets complicated quick, right? And so it's, again, very much an emergent space in LLMs. It is possible to poison them. It is possible to introduce more safety features as well. And it's certainly an area of opportunity across the technology space.
And it's definitely early in all of that. And so, Sam, I think as Andrei was talking about that, I thought when we first started to work together, probably 15 years ago, right, with inbound marketing and what we could do with SEO. And you were telling me to write more blogs. I think that one time you're challenging me to do a couple blogs a day to get the content out there, to see that. So that's what people were finding. With this LMO, are there things that people can do proactively on a positive way in order to get seen or get noticed and have impact with the large language models?
Yeah, I think the core difference is that the world of SEO, the kind of node that you were solving for was your website, right? Like, I want people to link back to my website. I want my website to have good content because I want people to discover my website. In language models, it's the topic, the concept. In most cases for us, it's going to be the brand name. So it's actually going to make, I don't want to say just like guest blogging, but what other people say about you, what other people say about things related to you are going to be far more important than just like what you say about yourself. So it's you've gone from, again, it's closer. The internet is starting to more closely reflect how humans interact and organize and think about things. And it's going from, how do I make my website something that's trustworthy to how do I make myself as a concept something that's trustworthy? So
as you say that, so things like being on other people's podcasts where there's that positive sentiment, that positive voice, share of voice and everything. And it's not what I say about my brand on my website, it's other ones. Would that be a way to do that then?
Yeah, I set that up as a softball question for you there, Tom. Yeah, so it absolutely is, especially because one of the things I find most fascinating about last couple of years of AI is what's called multimodality. So the search engines, when you and I were working together, was just text. In fact, you shouldn't have had a blog longer, I think, than like 500 words, because Google couldn't index the entire page back then, right? There was a file limit size. Now it's not just text. It can understand audio, it can understand video, it can understand tone and sentiment. And as somebody, like, personally, I prefer listening to things versus reading things. So now as you're creating this podcast content, it's almost as if you're feeding into the search engine of yesteryear a bunch of like text content that it's going to be indexing. So whereas it used to be just, being on an interview and stuff like that was more about like the PR, the brand recognition. Nowadays, it is more akin to the content creation in the early days of inbound marketing, because if the podcasts are getting indexed, that YouTube's getting indexed by these language models, and what people are saying about you and what you're saying about yourself and the context of what everybody else says in all of those areas is all going to matter.
Andrei, is it looking at current content also? Because I remember when ChatGPT first came out, they said it's only searched up through this date in time. Are they catching up and actually listening to what we're talking about now once it's published?
So that's actually a feature of language models, not a bug, was what we say in the tech space. Really, they're called checkpoints, right? And so language models, to be able to build one, to be able to train, let's say, a new version of ChatGPT 4.0 recently came out. And there's been 3.5 in between. There's been variations of Model 3 as well. What happens is they crawl the web, they crawl all sorts of data sources, and they use all of that data to then train that model, to train that generation of the model. And so they have to stop at some point. Essentially, they're usually about 6 months behind in terms of current knowledge, that knowledge cutoff. If you were to ask who the president was, probably it would say whoever was the president 6 months ago, right? And that is, again, a feature because you have to clean up a lot of data. Much of that work is actually manual. There's a lot of work that goes into how do you make sure that all the data is labeled correctly, is categorized correctly. We can do essentially A/B testing on the data and see which subsets of the data being combined will get us the best results when you're actually interacting with that language model. And it also takes a long time to ingest that data. We're talking in the petabytes, so not gigabytes, not terabytes, but the next level, even exabytes. So everything is essentially exponential at that point, and you have massive clusters of compute that is necessary to really be able to use that much data to then turn into something fairly small, which is what the language model is, that you can then interact with fairly quickly, right? So it doesn't take minutes or hours to give you an answer. You want it to be very, very fast. To do that, you have to limit how much data you put in. You have to compress and make some decisions in terms of what that data footprint even looks like. And then you say, okay, now we're going to release this model. And oh, by the way, the date cutoff for that knowledge was December 1st, 2021, let's say, because that's when we stopped indexing. And then we use that data checkpoints to be able to build this version of the model.
That's interesting. So the content we're doing right now, that could be part of Chat 5.0 or 6.0, something like that.
Correct.
Talk about evergreen content there, huh?
Exactly. And there are startups out there, the main one being Perplexity, for example, that does use an LLM like ChatGPT or Claude. And then on top of that, it has the ability to search in real time, connects to websites, to search engines like Google's search index or Bing's search index, uses both of them in this example. It also does their own crawling, their own searching of the web and figuring out what is the relevant data, real-time data that I should bring into this language model and put it in that what is called the language model's context window. How much knowledge can you give a language model to be able to then expect an answer? So we started years ago, or a year and a half ago, with ChatGPT. It had a fairly small context window. You can only give it about 4,000 tokens or 3,000 words at a time. Today, that's over 120,000 tokens for ChatGPT. Gemini from Google has 1 million tokens. So imagine now being able to put 50 times more content a year later in terms of interacting real time with a language model, using all that real time information to get better answers. We're going to sit here and talk about this 18 months from now. We're probably going to look at tens of millions, if not billion token context. What does that word look like? What does that mean when we can give it quite literally anything and everything about a company or a customer to a language model, and then be able to get real-time answers on much larger data footprints?
It's hard to, well, the human mind can't wrap its mind around exponential growth, right? And so looking back, Sam, maybe I think of when we first started to work together, you were my inbound marketing consultant, IMC there at HubSpot, and you were saying, this is what you need to do. And you were right. That set the foundation for things going forward, right? So maybe put your hat on and say, what if you were a consultant today? What would you be telling people to do to proactively leverage this amazing technology and also use it for, like you said, discoverability, not just on your website anymore?
I mean, the main thing is that content, not just on your website, and the sentiment around it becomes much more important. So I don't have evidence for this yet, but I suspect things like customer reviews are going to matter because it's feeding into the sentiment, right? It's all trained on that data. So your brand, we usually think of customer reviews as a bottom of the funnel kind of optimization. It helps people make a final decision. In this case, it's going to influence how the model is just thinking about you and perceiving you. The other thing is, the good news is you have to put less thought into creating content the right way, right? When you and I were doing blogs back in 2011, et cetera, right? It was all about like, do you have the right keywords? Do you have the structure right? AI can now overcome a lot of those limitations, and it'll be able to surface what should be the best content for the user in their context. Instead of you having to spend so much time thinking about, am I using the right keyword phrases? Am I structuring it properly? But the last thing is, so AI has this concept of hallucination, right? Or it sounds like it should be true. If it doesn't have a fact in its training set, it'll make up a fact that like sounds true, right? And if your brand isn't giving it stuff that it knows and has a high level of confidence is true, it'll also just start making up stuff about you. So you want to control that narrative. It's almost a public relations approach with an audience of either one or infinity, depending on whether you want to count AI as one entity or an infinite number of entities. But yeah, it's really making sure. So thinking about sentiment and context, right? And then thinking about the fact that like you need to control that narrative and be present in it.
That's interesting. When we were doing blogs, right, it was stuffing it with the keywords, or I remember typos, right? I always would go for I'd ranked for words that were mistyped because my blogs would be like that. Where now it's not, it's more the overall sentiment and who's putting out there. What you were saying there, it almost made it sound to me like you wanted to seed the information out there so that you're putting information out there intentionally so it can find it.
Exactly. So it's either going to use information it knows or it's going to fill in the gaps. My biggest wish list to Andrei for 1.5 years has been, can we teach AI when to doubt itself? Right now, it's kind of like an overconfident intern, right? Like it's fresh out of college. It thinks it knows everything and doesn't know like when to ask clarifying questions. And AI in its current state is very much the same way. So if it doesn't have information in its training data about you, it will just fill it in. It'll make it up. So really, understanding that you need to put that information out there and it has to be in the right context is going to be the key to like just making sure that you show up. Because in SEO, your worst case scenario was that you weren't found, right? In language models, your worst case scenario is that it makes up things about you that aren't true and that people believe it.
That was interesting. When HubSpot had their AI grader, it was interesting. You can run your brands through there and it will tell you what the sentiment, positive, neutral, or negative, and then the share of voice. And it was really interesting to say, here's the positive things that are being said about you, and here are the negative things that are being said about you. And it just struck me. It's like, what if you have a high share of voice, but a negative sentiment, right? What if they say, oh, yes, we're very familiar with them, and here's all the negative things that people are saying on there. What's worse than to be not found, to be found and have all the negative things come out.
Yeah, it's the Streisand effect of machine learning.
Yeah. So let's dig into agent.ai. And I often will misspeak this and say, make it plural, but it's agent.ai. I played around with that a little bit. Interesting tool. What's the vision for that, of what you're trying to accomplish in the world?
Yeah, so Dharmesh Shah, who's the co-founder of HubSpot, launched agent.ai with the goal of how do you kind of democratize access to building and using AI agents. AI agents have gone insanely fast in growth. Like it took like 10 years to go from having 150 companies on the MarTech landscape to having 11,000. Took more like 15 years. It took probably 15 months to pass the 10,000 mark of AI agents if you go to sites like there'sanaIforthat.com or any one of the directories. So the challenge that you're going to have is, based on who you are, your job, your profession, your company, your competitors, your customers, et cetera, how do you decide which agents to use in what order to accomplish your task? Because until we achieve artificial general intelligence, which is like not something worth talking about, it's because all of us collectively retire as a species if that happens. AI agents are going to be specialized. So you'll need an AI agent to draft the email, then help you decide who to send it to, then to analyze the results, then to create, dynamic content for them. And the goal is to have you be able to say, here's who I am and what I want to accomplish, and then have it choose which agents it's going to use, ideally then also use them for you in order by feeding those agents the information and context and commands that they need. So instead of you having to, go and look at and subscribe to a bunch of different platforms and decide which one you're going to use, when for that specific job at that time, it may not be the best one. Instead of you having to do that, agent.ai is going to get really good at knowing you and then helping you discover and use AI agents. And then conversely, all these people who are making all these AI agents, they're not really sustainable businesses in and of themselves. Right? It's kind of like Etsy stores or something like that, right? Where the only reason, you can make money on that is because Etsy exists as a way to bring all that together and funnel money to you. So as people are soon, we're going to open up the agent.ai marketplace to external developers. So people will be able to create agents and use them themselves, or they'll be able to create agents and actually have them monetized by letting other people use them.
Yeah, because to me, as a business owner, right, I see the power of it, but I don't want to have to build it. I don't have to search for all of those to bring those ones to me to solve the problems, like you said, until we get general or where the computers do everything for us. That's what we need.
Yeah, and it's the same thing when we were talking about your brand is going to have a perception by AI. Your apps are going to have your agents, AI agents are going to have a perception for agent.ai, right? So it's going to decide based on what it knows about you and how you work. If you're an AI agent, what other people have said about your outputs and their context, right? Like maybe highly technical people. Andrei really likes Anthropic, right? Because it's more technical. I tend to use Gemini because it can read my Google Drive, right? Like those kind of nuances for the same person, you're going to want to use a different thing. And so agents are going to have to optimize for how the orchestration agent, as it's called, views them, the same way brands are going to have to optimize for how language models perceive them in generating their output.
One of the things I always advise our clients is never give predictions, right? Because if you're right, everybody says, oh yeah, we all knew that. And if you're wrong, it's like, oh, how did they miss that one? So with that, here we are recording this end of the summer, 2024, or, going into the fall. What's the world going to look like in 6 months from now from someone searching? And maybe Andrei, you can talk about someone searching, and then Sam, you can talk about, the business owners. What's it going to look like for them? Andrei, I'll let you go first on that.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So I think for someone searching, for someone looking for content or looking for help, looking to complete certain tasks, Agent.ai and platforms like it are going to provide real capabilities to get real work done. It's still early. We're still optimizing. What does it mean to build an agent? What does it mean to give it enough context to do something useful? That is improving drastically. And we're seeing just how close we can get just in the last few months. So call it 6 months from now, I expect that everybody is going to both build and use agents on a weekly basis, if not daily basis, to help you with your day. Something as simple as, let me connect my Google Calendar and just tell me what I have to do today. Who am I meeting with? What is a podcast about? Do the research for me and just help me do my work better. All the way to, what does my day look like if you're a white collar worker? And how do I think about all the different tasks that I do on a daily basis? All the emails that I send out, all the emails that I receive. How do you categorize that? How do you help me on that path to do more of that work better? I think we're going to see great progress there, in addition to, how do you get more discoverable in AI, in these LLMs that are extracting knowledge across a variety of data sources, a variety of tools. I think that is going to evolve in terms of the safety elements that are still very much emergent, and give people more control. We're seeing, and above all else, we don't know what regulation is going to look like. It's still super early. But in terms of the search and in terms of some of the rights and other locales like in Europe to be forgotten, what does that look like in terms of an LLM? How can you make it forget? Because it can't really forget knowledge once it's internalized. So what does that look like? Are you at an advantage or disadvantage in that case? Safety is a double-edged sword, and we're still grappling with these massive questions. I think as adoption increases, we're going to see different solutions and continue to tweak, in particular, the safety approaches and what that means to being discovered, to being able to do concrete work on a daily basis and get real ultimate business results out of it.
So, Sam, how about for business owner? What is the world going to look like 6 months from now? And I think, with exponential, this is almost like asking, if we were a decade ago, what's the world going to look like in a decade from now? Now we're like, what's it going to look like 6 months from now?
Yeah, the pace of change is hard to keep up with. Even given the fact that it's my full-time job, it's hard for me to keep up with. I have two predictions. I don't know if they'll be in the next 6 months, but it'll be soon. And two pieces of advice. One is a prediction to Andrei's point. The way AI works and the way that our legal and economic systems works may not be fundamentally compatible. For example, again, Europe has the right to be forgotten. It's extremely difficult, nigh on impossible, to prove that nothing in your training data is using any content written by Tom Schwab anymore. And the burden of proof in Europe is on them. And then also we have all these copyright laws, et cetera. So I think the future is going to move towards more of these specialized, some of the smaller language models, right? Like in order to draft really great sales emails, do you really have to have like the Lord of the Rings in your training set? That's copyrighted work that's not particularly useful for that. So that's prediction number one. Prediction number two is, I think, the internet is actually a really inefficient way of organizing and presenting information to a user. Again, conversations are much more natural. And I think we're going to go, probably not in the next 6 months, but relatively soon, from having millions of websites to having thousands of orchestration agents. And then they can use any number of like subtools and processes. And just the way that your brand gets discovered, we're so locked into this concept of a website, which is funny because 15 years ago, I had to sell people on the fact that websites mattered and were something that they needed to have. But that's not going to be how you interact with customers in the future. It's one of the reasons Google's so worried, by the way, is because right now they're kind of the gateway to the internet. They're not going to be that, right? You're going to have a social AI, a shopping AI, et cetera. In terms of the two pieces of advice, the first one is that AI gives you new capability. It either makes something you're already doing more efficient, right? Like I send the same email responses generally a lot. So like it auto completes is kind of the easiest application of AI, or it gives you new superpowers. So, for example, for 10 plus years, Andrei has gotten nagged every time I need help with some little bit of code, right? Like my local Irish pub wants to create a drunken spelling bee and I need him to help me with it. Now I can go and like, I just told ChatGPT, it's like, here are the dimensions of the game. Can you write the code for me and also test it and make sure that it works? And it did. So things that would have needed me to go interact with a coworker in the past, it has to be simple things, right? Like it's still probably 75% of my questions have to go to Andrei, but that doesn't mean that like 25% of my technical questions, I now have new capabilities. Like I have superpowers I didn't have before. I can be a designer. I could be a data analyst without having to study to be a designer or a data analyst. I'm not going to create great art and I'm not going to create great engineering because AI can only reflect. AI is the regression to the mean. It's just the most mediocre stuff. And it's just a reflection of whatever's the most mediocre, like average that happens. But if I can be an average programmer, when previously the best I could do is edit HTML and CSS, that's a huge advantage. And then finally, just like a mindset thing. So when I talk to people about AI, they generally fall into two camps. They either think that AI is amazing and it's going to end the world tomorrow. And it's not going to do that. Even with this exponential growth, we're still fairly far away from like artificial general intelligence, much less the super intelligence that you worry about in sci-fi. Or they get frustrated because it's not already perfect, doesn't already work exactly the way they want it to, and they just discard it. So somewhere in the middle is the right where to be, right? AI is not going to be super useful for you in every case. You still need to check all of its work. Go ahead and Google the fun news stories about the lawyers who tried to use AI to generate their briefs, and it invented cases that didn't exist as a citation. Like you still got to stay on top of it. But the most interesting thing I do is ask AI how to use it, right? Like I discover new ways all the time when, for example, using ChatGPT, having it help me understand what it's capable of and having it help me understand like how I can work with it. So thinking of it less like a text box with a query and more like a conversation. It's supposed to be a conversational user experience.
What's ordinary to you is amazing to others and amazing to me. I love talking with both of you. You sort of future tellers, fortune tellers of this is where it's going. Somebody said the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I always think of you as being farther along. And I greatly appreciate everything you share here. If some people want to learn more, to follow you, where's the best place to go?
Yes, you can find both of us on agent.ai. I mean, we're on LinkedIn and email and everything else like that. But we're soon going to be launching the agent.ai community because Andrei and I have a backlog of like 50 blog articles and stuff that we want to write, but blogs aren't really the way to do it anymore. It's more about having a conversation community. So go to agent.ai. You can claim your profile. You can also find us.
What an incredible conversation. I want to thank Sam and Andrei for sharing their expertise on how AI is transforming the landscape of marketing and business. We touched on some critical points today, how AI, particularly tools like ChatGPT, can become your secret weapon in not just being found online, but in shaping the very conversations around your brand. As we discussed, the future isn't just about having a presence. It's about how that presence is perceived, not only by your clients, but by AI. Your next step, start thinking about your content in a new way. What are others saying about you? How are you showing up in AI-driven search results? Begin to seed positive content across other people's platforms and consider how tools like agent.ai can help you automate and optimize these efforts. Remember, the game is no longer about SEO. It's about how you're showing up in the conversations that AI is having about you. So let's get out there and start optimizing for the new world. Thanks for listening. And if you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from this knowledge. Until next time, keep leveraging the power of podcast interviews to grow your brand and grow your business.